Okay, we're live.
Thank you. So welcome to this meeting of the Waste Management Scrutiny Panel. I'd just like to make a quick announcement before we begin the meeting. So this virtual meeting is being live streamed. It will also be recorded and the recording subsequently made available via the Council's website. In addition, under the Openness of Local Government Bodies Regulations 2014, other people may film, record, tweet or blog from this meeting. The use of any such images or recordings is not under the Council's control. Please note that members of the public viewing the meeting via the live stream can only see the person who is speaking. Also that it does take a second or so for Zoom to switch view to the person speaking once they begin. Participants should please ensure that their microphone is muted when they're not speaking. So can we just confirm that the members of the panel present can see and hear the proceedings? So can we start with Councillor Baldwin, please?
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear the meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Baldwin. Is Councillor Forrest here? She's just connecting. Yeah. So I'll give her a minute. Councillor Howe?
Yes, Chair, I confirm I can see and hear the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Needham?
Thank you. Yes, I can see and hear proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Forrest? Councillor Forrest, I think you might need to unmute.
I can see it. Thank you, Chair. I can see everyone. I'm having a little problem with the audio at the moment, but I'll try and.
Can you hear us now? We can hear you.
That's good. Okay, fine.
And Councillor Seaton is also here as an observer. Councillor Seaton, can you see and hear the proceedings?
I can both see and hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we also have a number of officers present from the council, so I'm just going to ask them if they can also confirm that they can see and hear the proceedings. So we have Matt Bradford, the Head of Cleansing and Open Spaces.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear proceedings.
Thank you. Ed Brown from our Democratic Services team.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear proceedings.
And Laura Strong, also from Democratic Services.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear proceedings.
Okay, thank you all. In that case, we'll move on to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies. I believe we haven't received any apologies for this evening. Although Councillor Harper-Davies, who is the Cabinet Lead Member for Community Support and Equalities, has sent an apology. She's attended previous meetings to offer information where relevant. Okay, item number 2 then on the agenda is disclosures of pecuniary and personal interests. Do any members present have any of those to make? No? Excellent. And item 3 is declarations of the party whip. Are there any of those?
No.
Okay. Item 4 then is the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 2nd of February this year. Does anybody have any matters arising from those minutes to raise? Is everybody happy to approve those meetings as an accurate, those minutes as an accurate record of meeting? Yes?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Item 5 then is questions under Scrutiny Committee Procedure 11.16, and we haven't had any questions submitted. So that would lead us straight on to item 6, which is an item for Matt Bradford, the Head of Cleansing and Open Spaces, to lead on. And that's local authorities considered to be leaders in waste management. I believe Matt has a presentation to deliver. Matt?
Thank you, Chair. If I could just share my screen for a while, and I'll talk you through what I've been able to pull together. Okay, could I ask if you're able to see that on your screen at the moment? Good, excellent, thank you.
We can see it, Matt, but I can see a red box in the middle of your slide saying live captions and subtitles. I think you might just need to click that off.
There we go. Okay, so I think at the last meeting we discussed looking at our waste audit family to get comparable authorities and look how we compare with those. So what I did following the meeting was I went onto the government system that's put in place to collect waste data from every authority in England and Wales. It's called Waste Data Flow. And the audit family functionality, the tick box is still there, but the functionality has been turned off, unfortunately. So I couldn't follow the brief exactly as instructed by the panel at the last meeting. So I thought about how we could look at the best and worst performers in the East Midlands. And to do that, I looked at borough and district councils that were collection authorities only. So we took out all the urban authorities where and unitaries, and that just left the I say the borough and district authorities in the East Midlands. And I started to look at that data to see what we had in place, and that was quite interesting, really. So the data that we looked at was for 2021, that being the last full year's data that we have, and it was for a complete year. So the best district authority in the East Midlands for that year was South Northamptonshire District Council, performing very well, 63.5%, which if you remember rightly, we talked about the government target 65% by 2035. They're very close to hitting that target. They do have food waste collections. They do commingle their waste in a similar way to the way that we do. And they have free garden waste at the moment. But interestingly, they're introducing a charge from tomorrow, being the 1st of April. So it'll be interesting to see the impact on their performance next year to see if that reduces down. So that sort of goes to show that we talked about the national sort of government strategy on waste, wanting to, if possible, reduce or provide garden waste free of charge and implement food waste collections. And that's an authority that's currently doing that and performing very near the target that the government wants us to hit. Put some changes in place there. So the next one was Daventry, performing very well, 57.6%. They don't do free garden waste, so that's a chargeable service, but they do collect food waste and their waste is commingled. And similarly to Derbyshire Dales, slightly lower performance. They charge for their garden waste, but they did food waste, separate food waste collections, and their collections were what we call twin stream. So they separated the paper and card from any other component, any other recyclable elements within their bin. And then we had High Peak, 53.9. They did do food waste mixed with their garden waste, which is a variation on the others. And they were also commingled collection in a similar way to us for dry recycling. And then the last one, the top 5, was Rushcliffe, 51.1. So they had a similar setup to us, but they didn't collect glass in their commingled collections. So, another variation there on that. Glass is quite a heavy component there. We've got childwood sitting somewhere in the middle, 43.5%. There, you're familiar with our collection methods. We charge for our garden waste. We don't do food waste collections, and we are commingled. So we had the bottom 5 there as well. So Mansfield 35.2, chargeable garden waste, no food waste collection, and their collection method was commingled but a separate box for glass. Amber Valley 31.8, chargeable garden waste, no food waste, and again twin stream collection, a glass caddy there. Newark and Sherwood 29.8, similar to us but no glass in their commingled collection. South Holland 28.7, that was a bag collection rather than a bin collection there. And Bassett Law 25.4, so no free garden waste, no food waste, commingled collection but no glass on that particular collection. So I would assume that they have bring sites for their glass collection, or they make some other arrangements for that. So you can see quite a wide spread between the bottom performers 25.4 to the top 63.5, and the sort of variations in how those collection methods are done, really. I'd say it's probably South Northamptonshire are probably closer to the consistent collection guidance that's going through the consultation at the moment, but it's quite interesting that they're charging for their garden waste, starting to implement that now when the government have sort of hinted that they want to provide that service free of charge in the future. So there we go. Happy to answer any questions on that. Would you like me to leave that slide up while we take questions, or would you prefer me to take it down?
I think, could you leave it up for the time being? Thank you, Matt. Does anybody have any questions on that information? Can't see anybody, so I'm relying on you to put your virtual hands up. Can't see any hands up. It's interesting, the difference between South Northamptonshire and Daventry, because that sort of 6% drop, it we'll see next year once they've introduced the charges for free garden waste, but it could be that's the percentage they lose when they introduce the charges. And it seems like glass plays a really big part between the sort of highest collectors and the lowest. Where there's no glass, it seems to be significantly lower. Are there any advantages to collecting the food waste and the garden waste together, Matt?
Yes and no. So as ever with these things, there's a trade-off. There are benefits and there are disadvantages. So the benefit is that you can incorporate food waste collections in with the garden waste and mix it all in. So it's one collection on one vehicle with the garden waste, albeit that the garden waste collection is probably still fortnightly and the food's sitting in there for 2 weeks, whereas the most separate food waste collections are weekly. So the other thing is that the treatment costs. So when you collect garden waste on its own, the treatment that you do to it is it goes to be windrowed. So that's an open air composting arrangement where it's turned for 6 or 7 weeks and it's turned into compost. So it's in an open hard floor standing area and it's regularly turned until the compost is made. That's quite a cheap and effective way of dealing with garden waste. If you mix food with it, you can't use that treatment method, you have to either take the food waste and garden waste mix to an anaerobic digester, or to something called an in-vessel composting site. And the treatment costs for doing that are much higher. So basically, all of your garden waste and the food waste combined, the costs for treatment are much higher, and the biggest component of that tonnage is garden waste that you can treat much cheaper elsewhere. So I would guess treating, I'm guessing really, it is a sort of ballpark figure. I guess to treat garden waste in a windrow situation on its own, you're talking probably £21-22 a tonne. To do that, the cost, if you're taking it to an anaerobic digester or an in-vessel composter, I would guess the price per tonne would be more like 35 for that.
Okay, thank you. And would both sort of sets of materials have the same sort of destiny at the end? Could you use them both as compost, or do they have other uses?
They could both be used as compost. I guess with the AED plant, you do get some methane gas offtake, so you generate biogas, which can be used to generate electricity. So that's one byproduct, and you get the compost as well. So, but it is a much more expensive treatment method.
Okay, thank you. So you might, one of the main advantages, I suppose, is that you might reduce carbon emissions by reducing the number of collections that you have to go out and do. But
yes, the method of mixing garden and food waste together isn't one that's being promoted by the government in their new strategy. They're distinctly asking for the food waste to be collected separately.
okay, thank you, Matt. Does anyone else have any questions at this point, or can Matt move on to the next slide? I don't see any hands raised, so Matt, if you want to move on, that's fine.
I think there's a couple of hands up, Chair, that I can see. I think Councillor Forrest and Councillor Howe have their hands up that I can see.
Do apologise, I can't see them on my screen. I don't know who was first. Councillor Howe's at the top of my screen. Councillor Howe?
Thank you, Chair. Matt, could I just ask, we couldn't do mixed garden waste with food waste arbitrarily. It would have to be every borough, or I assume, sorry, that it would have to be every borough that delivers to the county that would have to do it. Presumably we couldn't, or could we? I don't know, separate it. And the other thing is, are all boroughs on this list in the same situation, that they have to give all their waste to their county council? Thank you.
Okay, Chair, if I could come back to Councillor Howe on that one. If we chose to collect food waste and garden waste together, Councillor Howe, we could do that. That's within our gift to do it. It's not something that I'd advocate for. So it's not something that I would recommend, although some councils do it. And it's not something that the government is keen on us doing either. All of the councils here are in the same situation as us, where as we are the Waste Collection Authority, we are a transferer of waste, if you like. We collect it from the household and take it for disposal at a site that the county council tells us to take it to. And all of these councils have the same arrangement. The exception to that is on some recycling, is that this could get quite complicated, but we'll give it a go. District and borough councils were able to make their own treatment arrangements for dry recycling and for garden waste. And the county councils, acting as a disposal authority, had to pay them something called recycling credits. if they did that. So a few years ago now, probably about 5 years ago, Charnwood used to have its own contract with CasePack and take the waste there. We used to pay the fees for them to sort it, process it, and then it was theirs to sell. And then the county would pay us the difference between what it would cost to landfill that waste and what the gate fee was, because we were saving them money by putting that in place. They would pay us £55 a tonne to collect that waste and make our own treatment arrangements for it. But there's an exception in those regulations that say that the county council can direct us to use a site of their choice and avoid paying us the recycling credits, which is what they did. So that gets quite complicated. So say 5 or 6 years ago, the Borough Council, with the agreement of the County Council, had contracts in place with treatment facilities for garden waste and dry recycling. And the recycling credits that we used to get was about 880,000 a year. When the County Council directed us to use the facilities that they'd procured, we lost that £880,000. And in order to recover those losses effectively, that's when we started to have the large jumps in garden waste pricing and things like that to try and balance those costs within the service, really. I'm not sure if I've made that very clear to people, but I don't know. Is that clear, Councillor Howe?
Yes, fine. I was just wondering with the county. No, you've covered it perfectly all right for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Councillor Forrest. Councillor Forrest, you're on mute still.
Can you hear me now? I do apologise. The gremlins are in. I'd like to ask, my first point is a point of clarification. I'd like to ask, have I understood then correctly what he had said, that those top councils who collect food waste, if we were to do it, we would have to follow them, and that is collect food waste on a weekly basis and not on a fortnightly basis as we do now. I just want to make sure I've understood that. I'm looking at what is collected on this fascinating screen we've got before us. It's really interesting. Would there be any advantage in Charnwood going for separate, as some of these councils do, going for separate collections of paper and or glass? We used to do it when we first started this system, but I'm just wondering whether there would be any advantage towards going back to that. Thank you.
Okay, the first, the answer to the first question, if I can, Chair, is that the government's strategy, the government's resources and waste strategy is indicates that we will be mandated to collect food waste, and they are asking us to collect it on a weekly basis. So I guess the choice for us really is whether we collect it in separate vehicles or whether we can integrate that with our existing collection. So effectively, you'd need a compartment on the recycling vehicle and the residual waste vehicle because they go fortnightly. You need a separate compartment on those vehicles to collect the food waste. But then when the vehicle's full, you have to look at where you're taking that waste to dispose of it. So we tip the waste that we collect twice a day. So the vehicle your collection vehicles at the moment for residual waste, garden waste and recycling, they collect until they're full, they go and tip, they come back to the point where they left on the round, and they finish the round off. They tip twice a day. If your food waste is needing to go south and your recycling needs to go north, that dual collection from one vehicle just doesn't work. So the advice from the consultants that are doing the waste strategy is that you'll need to do separate collection on separate vehicles on a weekly basis.
Thank you.
On that one. The paper and glass is quite an interesting question, because the paper mills that reprocess the recycle the paper and card that we collect, they have a processing issue with small fragments of glass that get into their materials through commingled collections. So it's the paper mills that are pushing for no glass or a separate collection of paper to separate those two recyclable materials. And I think the government is supportive of those materials being collected separately. But there is an exemption that could allow councils to collect it in a commingled way, in the commingled way that we do at the moment. So if we can prove that our collection, if separate collections aren't technically, environmentally or economically practicable, we can mix it all together. And there's a test that you have to do to show that. The trade-off between separate materials, separating materials out for collection and commingling is that you end up with multiple containers. So some of these people have glass boxes or an inner caddy that sits in the wheelie bin to collect paper and card. And I think we saw the Leicestershire figures at one of the meetings that showed that one of the authorities did do separate collection, and their yields, their recycling yields, were much lower than ours. And my view is the more complicated you make it for residents by asking them to separate and having multiple containers, the less participation that you get. That isn't a view that's shared by everybody in the industry. It's my view, and in Leicestershire, that's what sort of it is shown in the figures, really. So I guess there is a trade-off. I think the easier that we can make it, the more recycling that we can get. The risk is that if you mix it all together, you get higher contamination rates, and there's other risks involved. It's a balancing act, really.
Thank you for that, Matt.
I can't see any more hands raised, so if you want to move on to the next slide, Matt, thank you.
Yeah, the next slides, Chair, are to do with the next item on the agenda. So I don't know if you want me to unshare for a minute and then share it again, or
okay. Well, in that case, I don't think we have any recommendations to be recorded as a result of this item on the agenda and the discussion around it. So if everybody's happy to move on to item 7, then we'll ask you to do that. Thank you, Matt. Items. Sorry.
Okay. Thanks, yeah. Chair. If you're happy for me to.
Yeah, that's great. So item 7 is new research, technology and methods that could help improve recycling rates. So we did look at this at the last meeting, and members were asked to bring some ideas to that meeting. And then I think there were a couple of actions that were set as a result of that. I think one of them, I think a couple of members of the panel agreed to go away and either do some further research or contact organisations. I know one of them was me, and I did get in touch with Men in Sheds and Transitions, and I know that Councillor Forest also spoke to John Storer House, and Matt, I think you had some actions to report back on as well, didn't you?
I can't remember what those actions were, Chair. Actually, I've got my agenda a little bit mixed up. Actually, I thought we were going on to the waste and the county
Okay.
resources and waste strategy next. So
You're
apologies.
one step
apologies for
ahead of
that.
everybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Perhaps
wonder if-
Laura could remind us.
Well, they're set out in minute 13 higher up the agenda. So I wonder if Councillor Forrest could report back on what Johnston House said, and you, Councillor Ward, could perhaps report back on your two inquiries, and that will give Matt just time to have a look back at minute 13.
That's fine.
Things relating to the county council, Matt, I think they were.
Okay, so minute 13.
I can record those responses in the minutes for you, and we've got them formally.
Thank you, Laura. So mine was to speak to Men and Sheds and Transitions about whether they would be willing to engage with the Borough Council about sort of repair and reuse activities. And I spoke to both, and both were keen to have a conversation with the Borough Council about those two things. So I passed on contact details for them to Matt. Councillor Forrest, can you just give us some feedback on your action? You need to unmute again, Councillor Forrest.
Can you hear me? Thank you. I am so sorry about this. Yes, following the last meeting, well, at the last meeting, we discussed the possibility of setting up a scheme whereby people could borrow items that are only used occasionally, and things like lawnmowers, garden equipment, a sewing machine, that kind of thing, that you could go into the whatever it is, and you could hire out a sewing machine for the weekend. You hire it out on a Friday, bring it back on Monday, having made a beautiful skirt or run up a pair of curtains, that kind of thing. And it is done in other parts of the country and done quite successfully. And one of the places that was mentioned as being appropriate for this, because it's fairly central in Loughborough, was John Storer House. And I'm a trustee at John Storer House. So I undertook to talk to Karen Fostick, who is the director there. Now, they are not against this. In fact, she was quite intrigued by it. But the problem for John Storer House would be space. Now, they did a fantastic job during lockdown with food bank, etc. And that has now become a community shop, very successful. And that is in the space that would have been used for the kind of scheme that we discussed. So that is a space that would not be available to us. But they do have space at John Storer House upstairs. They have rooms that they hire out, and very often are taken. It's a way of generating income for them. So if we were serious about this, and we were really serious about John Storer House, I think there would be a monetary issue, because we could, yes, there are rooms there that we could use, but I think it would be a matter of trying to find funding in order to hire one of those rooms, because they couldn't let us have it for free, because that would be taking away a possible stream of income for them. And like all charities and struts at the moment, money is difficult. But having it in an upstairs room at John Storer House wouldn't actually be a problem, because it's flat upstairs. There are no steps up and down or anything like that. And of course, they do have a lift. So we could have a room we could have this equipment in, and we could operate like that. The other thing, of course, though, would be how is it going to be staffed? We would have to look for volunteers. And whilst there are volunteers around, John Storer House staff couldn't take it on a daily basis. We would be looking for a group of volunteers to run the scheme. So that's my report. That's what I did. That's what I came away with. No one else has really, if anybody else knows of another premises, another venue that we could look, I mean, I'm very happy to explore it, but I said I would do John Storer House, and I have done that. There we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Forrest. Yeah, I think all of the community venues are going to have similar issues, really, because especially at the moment when they're trying to sort of rebuild their customer base and generate income. I did suggest, I think, that perhaps it might be worth talking to Sofa on Nottingham Road, because I know they already do furniture upcycling.
Yes.
And they have a lot of space upstairs, so it may be worth contacting them. And I think, I can't remember if Councillor Needham agreed to any actions. I think you mentioned Leicester Fixers at the last meeting, Laurie.
Yeah, I did. Let me just quickly go back. I did get in touch with them, but the contact that I had for them isn't currently active with them anymore. But they did say that, like lots of other groups, that kind of during the pandemic and things, lots of things had fell away. It turns out they had a network sort of across the county of these fixer groups, and they basically said that a lot of them have kind of not been running particularly well, if at all, anymore. But the one in Harborough was still quite strong. But they've said one of the reasons that Harborough Fixers actually were quite strong was partly down to the person who was providing leadership to it, but also that they were actually quite well supported from their local council. That's something that they hadn't found from Leicester City Council, and that group has kind of fell away. So if we did want to reach out to that active group maybe and ask how their council supported them, I should be able to find details from that. But I thought that was perhaps the most interesting thing about it, was that the one that had survived was the one that had input from their local authority. So if you want me to go and follow that up a little bit further and see if I can find out exactly why, I can kind of endeavour to find some contact details for the people in Harborough.
Thank you, Laurie. I think that would be helpful. I think, anything is going to require some financial support, especially if they've got to provide premises and potentially staff as well. So I'm not quite sure where that financial support would come from. There might be some funding available from the county council for that kind of initiative, maybe. Matt, have you managed to find your actions on the minutes?
I think so, Chair. Sorry about that. Quick look through. Yes. The student waste action plan. I think that we talked about at the last meeting. That is still being finalised at the moment. I'm happy to share that when it is finished, and we'll email that out for comments. We are being quite proactive this year, working with the British Heart Foundation on some recycling initiatives, and we're happy that the sort of student, the uni and council liaison is picking back up after the pandemic. I think everyone went into sort of COVID mode, if you like, and some of the joint working was lost. That's coming back together quite nicely, and we've got some good plans forming for June this year. So I'll share those when they're finalised. They are sort of 90% there now, but it's not quite ready yet. So I'll email that round. So I think the other one was promoting the reusable nappies on the side of vehicles. We can do that. We have 21 RCVs, refuse vehicles, and we have panels on both sides. So there's 42 panels that we can make use of, and nappies or other schemes we can do. There is quite a high cost to changing those vehicles, the advertising panels. We might not be able to do all of them in one go, but there is a budget that we have with Serco for communications, so we can accommodate some waste minimisation or recycling promotion on the vehicles quite easily. I would suggest we start with 2 or 3 vehicles and have a look at changing the messages on there, refresh them and see what we could do, and certainly nappies could be incorporated in that.
Thank you, Matt. On that point, I was just thinking that if there is sort of a cost associated to that, and we have that many vehicles, rather than focusing just on the one initiative, the one sort of material, it might be worth also looking at sort of having sort of a range of sort of promotional panels that we could use. Also, maybe sharing sort of information on the items that can go in the recycling bins, because I think still people aren't clear, despite receiving lots of emails from Charnwood telling them what goes in the bins. I know we had another one in the last week.
Yeah.
But you know, I was talking to somebody the other day about what we can put in them, and the fact that we can put film in them from sort of, you know, ready meal trays and that sort of thing. So that might be worth including as well.
Sure, absolutely. There's scope to do quite a lot there. We do use the vehicle sides to promote not just waste and recycling services, but council services as a whole, and sort of corporate messages as well that we want to put out. So we'd have to be selective about which messages are perhaps getting towards the end of their use by date, and refresh those ones. But there is certainly a lot of scope to do that, and it's a one-off cost to change that. I did say it's quite expensive, but once you've paid it, it's not like a billboard or anything else. Once it's done, it's done. It stays there. And those vehicles are out and about 5 days a week, going past everybody's house in the borough. So it is a good form of advertising, and even though there's cost involved, you get quite a large spread for the money that you invest there. And we have a budget. We have a budget set aside to do that if members wish to do so. So we can, I guess, look at our top 3 issues that we want to promote and get some artwork designed and put those on the vehicles, if that's something that we want to do.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Councillor Needham.
Thank you. Yeah, I was wondering if there would be benefit in when we send out things about, like you said, that can be recycled quite regularly by email, etc. But whether we could make use of bin stickers for that as well. But rather than, it's just a suggestion, but I've come across a lot of times when I'm speaking to sort of like residents and just like, you know, generally people I know, we recycle quite a lot of things in Charnwood that don't necessarily get recycled everywhere else, and often says on the packaging that you can't recycle it, but actually you can in Charnwood. So things like, say, like clean foods, like soft plastics, etc. Whether it might be worth a bit of sort of like an education drive saying, did you know that actually you can put these in your bin? And because a lot of people are very surprised at some of the things they can recycle. So whether pushing that might be not more helpful, but a different way of promoting it rather than a very long list of everything. Like I said, and maybe something like stickers, because they kind of go to everybody, and you know, there's a section of residents that are not going to be getting that email information.
Thank you, Councillor Needham. Matt?
Yeah, that's something that we can do. That there is a cost of doing that. The loaders don't have time on their collection rounds to put the sticker on the bin. So the way that we've done that in the past is we've had agency staff go out on the rounds with the loaders to put the stickers on the bin at the same time that the bin's emptied. We could look into doing it. There is a budget there. It is a bit more expensive. I say that the loaders don't really have enough time to do that and complete the rounds. It's a very quick process to empty the bin, but we could look into that. We have used bin stickers before, but it's kind of been a different message. So we've used bin stickers on recycling bins to try and reduce contamination. So we've put a no thank you to nappies, textiles, and food in the recycling bin. There are three main contaminants. So rather than saying a yes please, we'd rather like you to put these items in your recycling bin, it was a please don't put these items in your recycling bin. So I'm not sure the psychology around those particular messages. I'm sure someone much more qualified than I am can look into that. But yeah, if we can have a positive message about what people can put in there, it might work differently. Or we could combine the two and say, yes, please, we'd really like you to do these, and no, thank you, we don't really want these at all in this bin.
Thank you, Matt. I think a couple of years ago, I did a street stall in the town centre with some of your officers before the pandemic, where we had lots of information on the stall on a market day about what can go in the bins, and that went really well, and lots of people engaged with that. And I think I know we have service pressures at the moment, but I think now that things are opened up again and we are getting footfall back into the market, I think that's something that would be really positive, especially if we incorporate a sort of, I don't know, a playful or a competitive element to it. I mean, it could be a competition. We could be asking people to sort of put things in a bin and put them in the right bin, and if they get it right, then they get a prize or a voucher or something. Or we could be, you know, asking families to take part in a challenge to see how much they can reduce the quantity of waste in their residual bins, that sort of thing. So I think there is a lot of scope, and I think when we come to putting recommendations at the end of this panel, we'll have lots of ideas to put forward. So,
yeah,
does anybody else have any actions that they remember committing to at the last meeting? I can't see.
If I could say, Chair, that I am still chasing up the visit case pack.
Okay.
We've had a response back from the county council who've said yes, you can go, but not at the moment, basically. So I think they said towards the end of April it would be it would be better. So we'll try and get that arranged, and we'll go along there to have a look.
Okay, thank you, Matt. If nobody else has any comments to make at this point, I think we can agree to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 8, the one you were waiting for, Matt, the draft Leicestershire Resource and Waste Strategy. Matt, I think you might be muted.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just say I'll share my screen again if that's okay. So what we're going to talk about now is the resources and waste strategy. It's in draft format at the moment, and it's a shared strategy between Leicestershire County Council and the 7 districts and boroughs in Leicestershire, and it looks at our waste collection, treatment, disposal, environmental factors, and all sorts of things going forwards. It incorporates the latest government thinking in the resources and waste strategy and tries to predict what's going to happen from the Environment Act that was actually passed in November last year, but there is secondary legislation required to implement some of the recommendations. So some of the things still a little bit unclear. So the draft strategy is out for consultation, public consultation at the moment. We've had over 3,000 responses from members of the public. And I guess what I'd like to do is talk about maybe having a panel response from this panel that we feed in once we've gone through what we're going to talk about. If you've done your homework and looked at the strategy online, you'll realise it's very complicated, many factors in there. But what I've done this evening is to look at the main pledges within the strategy to see what we think about those. And I focused on the collection arrangements part because that is fundamental, really, to us. It's the most fundamental part of the strategy going forwards. So what I was going to do now is to go through the pledges. I don't know if you want to read them out or if councillors have had a chance to look at these themselves and kind of agree or comment on each pledge or record whether we're in agreement or disagreement with them or seek clarification. So some of them are quite simple. I think others are quite probably a bit more involved. So should I talk through them, Chair, if you're happy to do that?
Yeah, if you could just give us a quick summary. I'm sure everybody's had a look at them, but if you can just summarise each one and then we'll discuss whether we have any comments to make on each one. Thank you.
Okay, so Pledge 1 seeks to ensure that all the partners within the partnership are looking at their purchasing activity and internal waste management to promote waste prevention, reuse and recycling and support the objectives. So it's quite an interesting one that we are aware of the resources that we use within the council and we're not being wasteful and we use good practice when we are disposing of things. So I'm not sure if there's any comments on that one.
So is this one just about the council's own sort of internal waste management, what gets thrown away within Southfields and other council buildings?
It's about procurement as well. So it's about maybe buying more recycled materials, or if we are constructing a building that we're doing so in a way that the waste is separated and reused wherever possible. So it goes through sort of the council's procurement of things right through to how it disposes of its own waste, really.
Okay, does anybody have any comments or any questions on this pledge? I can't see any hands. Does anybody object to this pledge? Do we agree with the principle of it? I can see people nodding, so I think you're free to move on to the next one, Matt.
Oh, I think Councillor Forrest has a hand up, Chair.
Apologies, yes. Councillor Forrest.
I'm sorry, it's me again. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yes, thank you. I ought to ask, right, it's really Pledge 1, I think. You said earlier on, Matt, that it's likely that the government are going to mandate the collection of food waste. And sort of looking at Pledge 1, are we, Tongborough Council, are we making preparations now in anticipation of this happening, please?
Yes, I'm not sure how it relates to this pledge, Councillor Forrest, but we are making preparations for collecting food waste from households. And we'll come on to that in a separate pledge in a moment.
That's absolutely fine. That's fine.
Yeah. So we can talk about that a bit further down, because I think that's covered in a different.
And it does say internal waste management services. So there we are.
Yeah, I think this is the waste that the council generates through the course of conducting its business.
Yeah.
Okay. Should I move on to pledge 2?
Yes, please, Matt.
Yeah.
Okay. So the partnership, including us as a council, we are a partnership member, will support and encourage waste prevention activity across Leicestershire. This will include working with stakeholders, residents, communities to prevent unnecessary waste arising, for example, through food waste reduction campaigns. So, these are things that we've talked about with the library of things and reuse. So we are doing some of this already, but there is always scope to do more. And this is saying that we'll carry on and support and encourage people to waste less.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Matt about this pledge? I don't see any hands raised. How closely do those authorities in the partnership work currently together to support and encourage waste prevention in the county?
We do have regular meetings and shared campaigns. I think, if I'm honest, that's kind of taken a back seat in the last couple of years, but hopefully we can step that up again. Now there's a lot of partnership working between all of the authorities, and I think the production of the waste strategy itself will act as a bit of a catalyst for us to work more closely together. We are meeting quite regularly. I'm meeting with my counterparts tomorrow morning to talk about progress on the waste strategy, and I'm hoping that will carry on when the strategy is published and adopted by each authority, that those will continue, and we'll start to sort of have an action plan and tick things off as we go, and continue to monitor things going forward.
Yeah, I hope you're right, and this strategy acts as a sort of galvanizing thing, and that sort of partnership continues going forward. I think it's really important as well that the campaigns are a continuous thing and not just a thing that gets done once and that box gets ticked and that's been done, because people need to be getting this message continuously, because you don't get to everybody with one campaign, and it needs to be different types of campaigns and different ways of delivering the message as well. So but in principle I think that's a really good pledge. Is everybody else happy to support this one? Looks like it.
Okay. Pledge 3 is that the partnership will continue delivering reuse services and expand the activities wherever practicable, working in partnership with other stakeholders to signpost to places that advocate for waste prevention and reuse in support of developing a circular economy. This includes a pledge to continue to improve the collection of items for reuse at household waste and recycling centres, and explore the development of reuse shops at suitable sites. So this is making available items for use when someone's finished with them, and putting arrangements in place for their collection and onward sale or gifting to people that need them.
Okay.
I think the county council is looking to put some reuse facilities in some of its tips, basically. It's household waste and recycling centres where people can drop items off and they will be reused rather than putting them in the skips that are there and they're then disposed of.
I was just going to ask you that. Are there any plans that you know of for any of those to be in Charnwood?
I don't think the plans are that developed yet, Councillor Ward. I'm not sure on that one. I would imagine that they would want to put these facilities in all of their household waste and recycling centres eventually. It may take some time to get there. So they might have 1 or 2 pilot sites, see how it works, tweak things, or decide it's been a big success and then roll it out across the other sites. So I'd say I think it'd be across the whole of their household waste recycling centres eventually, but they'll do it bit by bit, and I'm not sure where we are in that programme.
Didn't they used to have one at Weston? I'm not sure if it's still there. I can distinctly remember visiting one at one point.
I'm not sure about Weston, Councillor Ward.
Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions or comments on this pledge? Is everybody sort of in favour, supportive of this one in principle? Yeah, excellent. Pledge 4 then, please.
Okay, pledge 4 is the food waste one that we talked about a little bit earlier. So partnership will implement and promote separate food waste collections to all households, subject to confirmation of government policy legislation and the provision of funding. This will be as soon as required and when contracts and circumstances dictate. The County Council will procure anaerobic digestion capacity to treat the collected food waste in a manner that contributes to effective carbon emissions reductions across the county and improves soil quality. There you go. So this one is really echoing what the government strategy is to reduce to introduce mandatory weekly food waste collections from every household. I think Councillor Howe has his hand up, Chair.
Thank you, Matt. Councillor Howe?
Thank you, Chair. Just a question about this. I mean, in general, are we at a disadvantage in Charnwood with how far we have to move our waste? And with this digestion capacity here, I mean, because my waste from Birstall goes all the way out of the borough a long way. So with the, if we're going to get this anaerobic digestion capacity, is it going to be sort of put central in the boroughs, or are we still going to have to truck our waste an enormous distance to get it reprocessed, especially if we're doing more visits now? Thank you.
Yeah, I think what will happen, Councillor Howe, and this isn't all the mechanics of how it will all work hasn't been decided yet, but the principle is that we will collect the food waste and we'll take it to what's known as a transfer station, where our collection vehicles will tip it off. It will be bulked with food waste from other districts, and then it'll be hauled to the treatment centre in a larger vehicle, so it's bulk hauled to wherever that facility might be. Now, I don't know at the moment which anaerobic digestion facility we're going to be using, or the County Council is going to be using, whether that will be in the borough or whether it will be somewhere else. I'm not aware that there are any in the borough at the moment, actually, so it is likely to be outside of the borough somewhere, unless we have someone that wants to invest and build one, because there will be a lot more demand for these facilities going forward. I don't think there's the capacity in the system to treat all this food waste at the moment that all these councils are going to be collecting. I don't think the facilities are there at the moment, so there is going to be a need for new facilities, and where those will crop up, I don't really know at the minute.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. There's a gap in the market for somebody there, Phil.
There certainly is.
So obviously at this stage, the wording of this pledge around as soon as required and when contracts and circumstances dictate, subject to confirmation of government policy, legislation and the provision of funding. We're not putting a date on it because we're hoping that if we have to start up a new type of waste collection, that we may get some financial support to do that. So obviously you've said before there is quite a financial investment required.
It is quite expensive, Councillor Ward, but the government have said that this is a new burden on local authorities and that they will fully fund it. And I hope that happens.
Okay. Does anyone else have any more comments to make on pledge number 4? Are we happy to move on to pledge number 5? Yes. Okay.
Okay, so pledge number 5. The partnership will explore the use of alternative fuels for collection vehicles and the transportation of waste and resources to further reduce the carbon emissions of the service and improve air quality. So quite an important one for us. We run 21 refuse collection vehicles. They're all diesel and they do about 1 mile to the litre. So they're using a lot of diesel. And we need to sort of work towards zero carbon. So this is looking at alternative fuels to enable us to do that. So there are electric refuse collection vehicles on the market. I'd say they're still quite new, a little bit. Their reliability and long-term costs are still yet to be established, and they're very, very expensive to buy. So, you know, there's some way to go on that one, but it is saying that, you know, when our, basically for Charlwood, this means that when our vehicles need replacing, that we will look at something other than diesel to fuel them.
Okay, does anybody have any questions or comments on pledge number 5? Councillor Baldwin.
Thank you. I can't raise my hand automatically, unfortunately. I'm just thinking about, we have, the borough looks at procurement for its own needs, but I wonder whether all the councils ought to look at their own procurement for things like large pieces of kit. So if, let's say, 2 or more councils were looking to replace large bits of kit, then does it make sense to put in a bid between the 3 of them and reduce costs that way by buying more and getting a reduction?
It depends, Councillor Baldwin. It is the answer. So it all depends on how that renewal cycle works and what equipment's being replaced at that particular time. So when we say kits, the main equipment that we need for waste collection is the vehicles, really. There's probably across the waste recycling and street cleansing fleets, about 35 vehicles in total. So they have a sort of renewal program generally, and councils tend to depreciate those over 7 to 10 years. So it all depends when they're due for renewal and what councils' aspirations are with regard to carbon neutral timescales and things like that. The vehicles that we purchased 2 years ago were bought off a procurement framework that looks at sort of group purchasing power. So the purchasing framework goes to manufacturers and suppliers and says that we're setting this framework up and you can register to be on this framework, and we think that you'll get councils orders through the framework of X number, 200, 300 vehicles, and we want a preferential price for that. So you can look at group purchasing power through frameworks without sort of partnering up with other local councils through a framework. So that's the way that we've done it. And the last time we did it, the purchase price that we got was very competitive for the vehicles.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Does anybody else have any questions on this pledge? Obviously, we only replaced our current fleet a couple of years ago. So we've got another how many years to run that fleet, Matt, before we look at procuring new vehicles?
Yeah, so we've depreciated the vehicles in our financial modelling. We depreciated the vehicles over 8 years with a view to running them up to 10. So as a council, we've made a pledge to be carbon zero by 2030. So to make that happen, I think we'll have to replace these vehicles prior to that date and have alternatives in place, because the environmental services fleet and its emissions is quite a huge chunk of our carbon emissions at the moment.
Yes, it is. And I know a number of councillors raised concerns about this when we were procuring this fleet.
Yes. At the time when we purchased them, I don't think there are any viable alternatives on the market. So the technology is still a little bit untested. We will do an electric vehicle trial in the next year or two.
On waste vehicles?
Yes. And I am working with the Energy Saving Trust to do a green fleet audit to look at the roadmap for getting to the vehicles to net zero. So just to say that, just to give members an idea of what we were dealing with when we renewed the fleet, I'd say a rough purchase price for an RCV that we purchased was probably £185,000 per vehicle for each vehicle for the diesel. The electric the electric one was £450,000. The comparable electric one was £450,000 each vehicle, and there was no warranty on the battery available because it was new to the market and no one knew what it would do. And I think some authorities have got electric vehicles that they're using and trialing. They've probably got one or two in the whole of their fleet, and it's being done as a bit of a marketing tool, if I'm honest, to say that we're on this journey to go carbon zero. I don't know any waste collection authority that's fully operating on electric vehicles at the moment.
Okay. I suppose there as well, then there's a bit of a gap in the market for them to kind of waste vehicle producers to kind of hurry up and make those viable, the same as there will be with anaerobic facilities.
Yeah, the manufacturers are doing it, but it's the cost, and I'm hoping that as the technology comes on and the manufacturing improves, that the cost will come down.
Okay. Councillor Howe has raised his hand. Councillor Howe?
Thank you, Chair. Just let me lower it before I forget. Right. Yeah, I'd just like to say, well, basically, it's what Matt said. When we made that decision, I think we're fortunate that the technology hadn't developed in this next, what does it say, 5 years, because we need to be considering it a year before we do. We'll learn from others' successes and failures, and also the improvement in technology. So I think, the solution we did at the time is the best one. And hopefully by the time we make the decision, there'll be a lot more evidence from other authorities to make us make the correct one next time. Thank you.
Yeah, just another thing, Chair, if I can, before we move on this, some members may be aware or not that some neighbouring councils have switched to HVO, vegetable oil, fueling for their vehicles. So hydrogenated vegetable oil, I think is the technical term, HVO. And they are operating their diesel fleet with vegetable oil. It does not invalidate any warranty, and the vehicles run fine on HVO. It is more expensive than diesel, slightly 10 or 15 pence a litre. I've taken advice from the Energy Saving Trust on HVO, and they are not supportive of using HVO at the moment because a lot of the HVO stocks come from the Far East, where they have traditionally reused their vegetable oil after it's been used once. So they keep using it and using it for domestic purposes. What's happening now in the Far East is people use the vegetable oil once and it gets sold off for fuel, for biodiesel, effectively. And then you need more vegetable oil because it's not being reused as much, and it's causing deforestation and things like that in certain parts of the world. So it's very complicated. Some authorities have said, right, we're using this veg oil, zero carbon, and that's great. That's what we want to do. We've made a carbon pledge, but there are other environmental impacts that you have to take into account, and it is very complicated. I think longer term, hydrogen is going to be the preferred fuel for these vehicles rather than electricity and HVO. I think that's where we'll get to in the long term, but we'll see on that one.
Okay, that's interesting information. Thank you, Matt. And I think in terms of our current vehicles, I think it was just really unfortunate timing that they needed renewing when they did, but there we go. Is everybody happy for us to move on to pledge number 6? Yes, okay.
Okay, so pledge number 6 is that the partnership will continue to offer a garden waste collection system to Leicestershire residents, and this will follow government guidelines as to the form of the collection and will be subject to legislation and total government funding. The partnership will continue to procure composting capacity to treat collected garden waste in a manner that supports carbon reduction and improves soil quality. So, this one, reading between the lines, this one is that every council will collect garden waste and will do so in a manner that meets the government guidelines. There has been talk of the government making us collect garden waste for free and providing funding for that to happen. It's unclear at the moment whether that funding will be the funding to roll out the service to all residents, or whether it will also include an element that offsets the income that we currently receive from garden waste collections, which is an important part of the council's overall budget. So that's that really.
Thank you, Matt. Can you remind us how much revenue that those garden waste collections generate for the council at the moment?
Current year, 1.4 million, approximately.
Okay, obviously
the council's overall budget is about 20 million, and 1.4 million of that is derived from garden waste charging.
Okay. Times every local authority in the country by that, and that's a significant amount of money for the government to have to subsidise local authorities with, isn't it?
It is. It is. I think this one's got a bit of a way to run. Councillor Ward, we'll see where we end up.
Okay. I just had a question which is related to this, but very loosely. I just wondered what happens to the compost that's created, because it says in the strategy document that it gets used to fertilise land. It doesn't say which land. Is that council land? Do we sell it to farmers? What happens to it?
Yeah, it's used for agricultural purposes mainly, and land restoration. So agricultural farm applications, land restoration is you might have a former landfill site or a quarry infill, and it'll be used to top that off, really. So I'd say mostly in agriculture, but there are some land restoration applications as well.
So we do generate some income from the sale of the compost created with garden waste? No.
It's not our material. We don't ever own it. As Charnwood, we pick it up from the resident and take it to the disposal point, and the processor owns the end product. So, but the treatment of the garden waste, to turn the garden waste into compost, there's a cost to that, and the cost outweighs the value of the end product. So it's a net cost. There isn't any income when all the maths is done.
Okay, I understand. Does anybody else have any questions? Councillor Howe has his hand raised again.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say, with the garden waste, it used to be possible to buy it from the county council, but for at least a year now, I've been trying to, when I've been to them, and they don't appear to sell it anymore, because members of the public could buy it to improve their soil, but I don't know, it's all appears to have vanished now. The public can't seem to buy it any longer. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure what arrangements the county council had in place with the processor that allowed them to sort of have some of that compost for resale, but I'm not sure that's there anymore. I can look and find out, Councillor Howe, if you want me to, and see whether that's possible.
Okay, I can't see anyone else with a hand up. Are we happy to move on to the next pledge? Yeah. Pledge number 7 then.
Okay, pledge number 7 is that the partnership will ensure that the full range of recyclables as specified by the government and subject to funding are collected from residents and businesses where applicable across Leicestershire by 2025, or as soon as possible when contracts and circumstances dictate. So the government has a list of materials that it wants us to collect as part of our domestic recycling scheme. I think we already collect them all, actually, so we haven't got a great distance to go with this one. I think the promotion that we talked about earlier and the awareness raising of what we do actually collect is probably the more important thing for us here. But we are collecting quite a wide range of products that some other authorities don't at the moment.
Okay, Matt, I had a question about this one. When I was looking at these pledges in the strategy document, there was some reference made to trade waste collections, and I see on your summary you've put and businesses where applicable, and all of the other local authorities in Leicestershire already collect mixed recyclables from businesses, and Charnwood is the only one that doesn't. But it did say on there that there are plans to start collecting mixed recycling from businesses. Do you have any dates for that? And do you think that will those figures of that recycling be included in our recycling in our general recycling figures?
Okay. So we're currently doing a survey of our residual waste recycling clients, business clients, to see what the appetite is for recycling. So that is taking place at the moment, and if the appetite's there to do it and it's viable, then we will introduce that collection. The way that the trade waste works is I buy capacity from Serco. So I buy the vehicle and the operatives in half a day increments. So in order to make that vehicle viable, I need at least half a day's worth of business to pay for it effectively. There's a cost. So each half a day that I procure from Serco costs about £20,000 a year in running costs. So if I can cover the costs of doing a recycling collection, then we'll do it. Or even if we have to kind of, even if we're 80% there, we need to sell some more business to meet the gap, we will probably do it. We're just gauging the demand there at the moment. What we also do, Chair, is the Loughborough bid, the Business Improvement District. Part of their offer to all the businesses within the bid area is for free recycling, business recycling. So the bid pay us to collect recycling from all the businesses in Loughborough that participate in the bid at the moment. So we are doing trade waste recycling from the businesses in Loughborough Town Centre through their bid subscriptions. That's been in place for some years now.
Okay, so the businesses that you're looking to sort of get that mixed recycling trade from then are the ones that aren't in the bid area. So do you have like a timescale for completing this survey and analysing the results and deciding whether or not this is viable?
I'd say within the next few months, really. I've tasked one of my officers to do it. So the survey will go out, and say if there's a demand that dictates that we can put a vehicle on, we'll do it, and we'll expand and we'll buy that capacity that we need to provide that service. Any recyclables that we collect don't count towards our household waste recycling targets. It's separate, unfortunately, but it's the right thing to do. I think businesses are very environmentally aware, and it's something that we need to provide. So we are looking at doing that going forward.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Does anybody else have any questions on this pledge? Is everybody happy with it and happy to move on to the next one? Okay.
So the partnership will continue to explore the viability of adding extra materials to recycling collections, so batteries, small electrical goods or clothing, to keep Leicestershire's performance above the national average.
Okay. Any questions or comments on this pledge? I had a quick one about the extra materials. We've discussed this, I think, in previous meetings about adding batteries and textiles and various other things. Is that something that the partnership is going to be able to do, or is that something that the county council that runs the household waste sites is going to be responsible for?
I think that's down to us, Councillor Ward, to add it as part of our collections. If we collect it, then the county council will need to provide us with a disposal point in which to take it, but it's for us to implement this as part of our regular collection system that we've got. So we have collected batteries before. There are some technical issues that have meant that we aren't at the moment. Some logistical problems, and we've done textiles before as well, but that stopped. But we'll look at reintroducing those in due course where we can.
Okay. Does anybody else have any comments to make on this item in this veg? Councillor Howe.
Thank you, Chair. Just let me lower my hand so I remember. Yeah, because, I mean, to me, this is covered. I mean, batteries, there's a lot of supermarkets and places that collect them now. I don't have any problem disposing of them. And I mean, it's the same with sort of clothing and things, because there's lots of charities and you can sell clothing into one of the DIY shops, place in Leicester. There's a business there that buys them. So, I mean, to me, there's already quite a lot of places for this to do. So it would be odd if we started, as local authorities, disrupting something that's already happening free. And the point is, with all this waste of batteries that go through the private collection, do they count towards anything for us for recycling, or do they in effect vanish in the statistics somewhere? Thank you.
Yeah, if I could come back on those questions, Chair, please. Yeah, batteries. Organisations that sell batteries, retailers that sell batteries, are under a legal obligation to take spent batteries back. So that's where you see the battery tubes in supermarkets and DIY shops and things like that. It's a legal requirement for them to do so, which was one of the considerations when we had to stop our battery collections. The reason we stopped the battery collections is that it's actually quite a significant fire risk for us, and the place where we were disposing of them, storing them, we had an agreement where we could store them after we collected them with our recycling. The organisation that took them did a fire risk assessment and decided that they could no longer help us with that. So that arrangement was no longer in place. So, there is a fire risk. It's a fire risk when we transport them and when we store them, and that's one to keep an eye on, really. Clothing, again, I wouldn't disagree with Councillor Howe. There are plenty of outlets out there that will take clothes, textiles, either for reuse or for recycling into other products. That tonnage tends to get lost in the system and not counted towards our targets effectively. So, but the pledge is to explore the viability of adding extra materials, and I guess these things will be part of the viability assessment that we'll undertake at the time to see whether we can do this or not.
Okay, thanks a lot for that. Cheers.
Thank you, Matt. I tend to agree with Councillor Howe's point that all three of those items listed can be recycled elsewhere, including the small electrical devices. If you buy anything from Currys or anywhere else, I think they're obliged to accept the appliance that you're replacing. So there are places that you can do that already. I'd like to see included in that pledge some of the items that it's more difficult to recycle. Some of the items that places like TerraCycle will recycle. I know a lot of products once the Environment Bill goes through and the part about sort of reducing non-recyclable packaging is introduced, that maybe some of those items will disappear from the residual waste stream anyway. But there are limited options for people that want to recycle, you know, coffee machine pods and crisp packets and those things. So I don't know how anybody else on the panel feels about it, but when we're making our submission to the consultation, I'd quite like to suggest that the partnership looks at those kind of items rather than items that are already recycled elsewhere within the county. Councillor Needham.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I would completely agree with that, actually, that that's an opportunity there to find those hard to recycle things and make it much easier for people. Yeah, because like you say, those things can be readily recycled or, you know, through further channels. But yeah, if we could suggest that, you know, the Waste Partnership consider something like you were just saying, yeah, I'd definitely be in favour of that too.
Well, Laura's busy writing away, so I think she's got that one down. Okay, are we happy to move on to pledge number 8?
I think we've done.
Are we
8,
done?
Chair.
Are we on 8? Number
Sorry,
9.
I think we're on 9 now.
track.
We're getting towards the end of the pledges now. I think there's 11 in total. So pledge 9, the partnership will put in place collection systems to contribute towards the achievement of a national 65% recycling target by 2035. This may include restricting residual waste capacity to encourage greater material separation, carbon savings and resource recovery. Improvements in materials recovery at household waste recycling centres will also contribute towards the national target. So, okay. I guess for us, what they said, the key words in this for us are the bit that says restricting residual waste capacity. So there are 2 ways that we do that. Remember, you have to think that when we do this, we may have food waste collections and the possibility of free garden waste collections and manufacturers putting more easily recyclable materials on the market. So what this is saying is that it may include restricting residual waste capacity. That means smaller bins or collecting residual waste less frequently than we do now. So when we look at collection options modelled, I'm not sure if we're going to run out of time to do that tonight or not, but that would mean that the options model would mean either collecting waste 3 weekly instead of fortnightly, residual waste, or giving everybody a 140 litre bin rather than a 280 litre bin. So they're the sort of things that we're talking about when we say restricting residual waste.
Okay, thanks, Matt. And obviously, I hope if we do end up going down the route of giving smaller bins, we're hoping that the fact that the government will be putting more responsibility onto manufacturers to reduce their packaging will help residents actually need less capacity in their residual waste bin. So
yes, yeah.
Okay.
When we say smaller bins and less frequent collections, we are specifically talking about black bin waste, residual waste, not recycling or food waste.
Okay. Does anyone else have any comments or questions on pledge number 9? Are we happy to move on then to number 10?
So pledge 10 is the partnership will continue to allocate a communications budget sufficient to help promote good recycling behaviour and maximise resource recovery to support the circular economy and low carbon objectives of the strategy. So we'll have a budget for communications going forward that meets those objectives.
Okay, so you currently have a budget for that, because you've told us that that's what the sort of billboard things on the side of the waste lorries would be paid for out of. I don't know if anyone else has any comments or questions on this one. The only thing I would say is that that's great, but I think it's really important that all of the authorities in the partnership have a joint communication strategy so that messages are shared across authorities, because I see often things coming out from the county council that aren't sort of shared by the borough council. Sometimes I don't know if it's just an impression, but it seems like there's not a lot of sort of communication, and there might be communication at your level, Matt, between the authorities, but when it comes to actually getting the information out to residents.
Okay,
that's just my perspective on it. Councillor Forrest has her hand up as well.
Thank you, Chair. I think what we've seen here from Matt is, well, first of all, it's incredibly ambitious, and I don't think there is anything wrong with that. I think in terms of waste strategy, we should be ambitious. But what I have reservations about is there are 10 pledges, and that is a huge undertaking for us. And the only one I would have reservations about is the one that we've discussed, which is Pledge 8, because we could fall into the trap of just duplicating what other people are doing as well. But I'm wholly in favour of this, and I wholly support it. But I wouldn't like us to be over-promising and under-delivering, because I am just conscious that this is wholly admirable, and I can't argue with any of it, but it's the size of the commitment that worries me, and I just want to express that. It's the prospect of, as I've just said, over-promising, under-delivering. Thank you, Chair.
Would you like me to come back on that one?
If you
Chair?
would like to, Matt.
I can. The waste strategy is up to 2050. So that's a long period of time. It is quite ambitious. A lot of the targets and the ambition reflected in the local strategy is part of the national strategy that the government have promised to fund us for. And we are sort of putting local arrangements in place, or the local strategy to deliver that. So it is a bit of a step change, Councillor Forrest. It's a massive change and a massive commitment nationally from government to do this. And it's the biggest change in the way that we deal with our household waste in probably 30 years. So it is very ambitious. But with the right funding and the right inputs, I think that we can deliver it collectively. I think we can over that time period, and it is dependent on those things coming through, like the funding. As a lot of things are, it does come down to the money being in place to enable these things to happen. But let's hope it does, and we can get there. We can do it.
Okay, thank you, Matt. You know, Sandy's right, it is an ambitious strategy, but we do have some, it is going to be developed over a period of time, and Charnwood is not in it on their own. You know, that we have the support of all the other authorities in the county, and I think the will is there, and hopefully the funding will be forthcoming as well from the government to support it. So does anyone else have any comments on pledge number 10? Can we move on to our last pledge then, number 11?
Yeah, pledge 11 is one for the county council, probably more than anybody else, but it's quite an important one. So the county council will reduce waste sent to landfill to less than 5% by 2025, well in advance of the 10% national target by 2030. The county council will undertake future procurement processes for residual waste treatment, alternatives to landfill, in line with the vision and objectives of the strategy. So this is the county council saying that we are not going to send waste to landfill anymore. We'll look for alternatives.
Okay, so it's a target for the county council, but it's not one they're going to achieve without working in partnership with the district councils, because they're going to be dependent on the district councils really to deliver as well, aren't they?
Well, we'll collect the residual. This is about residual waste. We'll collect it, and we are obligated to take it where the county council directs us to take it. So it's for the county council to have those disposal arrangements and contracts in place with organisations that don't landfill waste, rather than the old traditional landfill sites. So I guess we are a kind of a secondary partner in this. The primary sort of action for this is with the county.
But it's going to be dependent on the collection options that we all go for.
Yeah.
What do they mean by alternative residual waste treatments? What alternatives are there?
It's mainly energy from waste. I think is the term. Incineration is the main one. So energy from waste plants. So the county council uses a couple of incinerators at the moment, and that generates electricity that's fed back into the grid.
Okay, Councillor Needham.
Thank you. I'm just curious to know if you've got the figure, Matt. What's the percentage currently sent to landfill?
I think it's around 40 or 50% across the county. I think from there isn't a lot of our waste that gets sent to landfill. I think it's more the boroughs in the south of the county that get sent to get their residual waste sent to landfill. Most of ours is incinerated, the vast majority.
Okay, so that's a huge reduction in less than 3 years.
Yes,
that's incredibly ambitious.
It's significant, and I would think that the county council, having put this in the strategy, have plans in place to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pleased to hear it. It's just, it's interesting to see what a big change that is in such a short time.
Yeah, I think they must have some definite plans in place to deliver this. So I think that there's sort of work afoot to deliver this already.
Thank you, Laurie, for that question. I guess there must be capacity then within the county for that residual waste to be treated.
It's not necessarily within the county, Councillor Ward. So our residual waste is bulked up at what we call a transfer station. We'll deliver it to somewhere where it's bulked and hauled away somewhere to be incinerated. So I think some of our waste goes for treatment in Coventry at the incinerator there, and I think one in Stoke-on-Trent at the moment.
Okay. Does anyone else have any comments or questions on Veg 11? Do we have any recommendations on this, or are we happy to just accept it? Can't see any hands or anything, so I think we just accept this one. So that sort of leads us to sort of summarise any recommendations that we want to make in our submission to the consultation. Laura, could you just summarise what we've put forward so far?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. So the main one related to the pledge 8 concerns that there was no pledge to look at more difficult to recycle items that there weren't any arrangements for. That's the main one I highlighted. I would suggest there's probably a few little bits and pieces within all the discussion. So if you're looking as a result of this item to submit a response of the panel to the consultation.
I think that would be a positive thing for the panel to do.
So my suggestion on that, rather than me miss anything at this point, is that when the minutes are prepared, perhaps as chair, you might use those to pick out the bits that you would like to say. I know there's a deadline to do the submissions, and then perhaps we could outside of the meeting circulate those to the members of the panel, just for them to be happy that that's the summary of what they thought on the matter, and that could be used as the panel's response. Would that be an acceptable way of doing things?
Would that be acceptable to the other members of the panel? Because I think our next meeting is not until the 26th of April, which is just after the deadline for submitting to the consultation. So if we do that, and then we can circulate a draft submission to the other members of the panel to feed back on and make any suggestions for. Yeah, okay. Okay, so in that case, I think we can move on to, do we need to discuss the collection options, Matt? Are we forgetting that?
I do have some slides on the collection options, Chair. They are quite in-depth and complicated, and I know we've been going for 2 hours already.
We've got 5 minutes left.
I'm quite happy to carry on, but I'll leave that to you. We can touch on them, ask members to read and digest them for the next meeting.
The only issue with that being that next meeting will happen after the consultations close, so we won't be able to include any comments on the collection options.
Yes.
Could you maybe give us a whistle-stop tour of those options?
I'll try.
And then maybe members can go away and sort of think about it, and we can...
If I could have 20 minutes, could we go on till 15:15?
How do members feel about that? Is everybody happy to continue till 8:15? The only other item on the agenda is to agree the dates of the next panel meetings. So is that acceptable to everybody to finish at 8:15? I don't see anybody shaking their head, so I guess we can carry on.
Okay, I'll whistle stop. I'll go through it. Please please ask any questions that you've got, and I'll try and answer them quickly. So part of the waste strategy, we've commissioned some consultants that have looked at our collection options going forward for the districts, and they've done some high level modelling, very high level. So I'd say this modelling is used for decision making. It's not necessarily what you would get if you went to procurement to procure these services, but it's indicative. So they've modelled cost, performance, carbon output, acceptance politically and with the public, and all of other things. And I think there are sort of 8 or 9 options that have been modelled. So we've got a baseline cost and a baseline service. Option 1 looks at as we are now, but doing more education and awareness work, see where we get with that one. Option 2 is as we are now, focusing on promoting reuse and repair across the county. Option 3, it's important that we understand option 3 because this is a big one, and some of the following options are option 3 plus minus this, that and the other. So we need to understand option 3. So option 3 is as current collection except recycling collection to include materials indicated in the National Consistent Collection Consultation, so plastic film and cartons where it's not collected. We already do that. Free garden waste collection, separate food waste collection across the partnership, National Extended Producer Responsibility and Deposit Return Scheme. So this is where packaging producers and retailers are charged for the packaging that they put on the market, and that funding comes into the districts to collect it. The Deposit Return Scheme is for drinks containers where you pay 20 pence when you buy it for the container, and that 20 pence is redeemed when you take it back to the shop. Okay. And there's some sensitivity on recycling to include batteries, textiles, and small electrical items on that. So that's your option 3. Option 3 is what the government is promoting as their preferred collection arrangement. Okay. Option 4 is the same as option 3, but garden waste is retained as a chargeable service, as it is now. Option 5A is the same as option 3, with residual waste still collected fortnightly, but in a 140 litre bin. So that's a bin that's half the size of the bin that most people have at the moment for residual waste. Okay. Option 5B is option 3, but instead of having a smaller bin, the bin that you have at the moment is collected every 3 weeks instead of every 2. Option 6 is as we are, but collecting paper and card in one box separately and everything else in a wheel bin. So we're taking the paper and the card out so it's not contaminated with glass. Option 7 is on the recycling, it's curbside sort. So we're asking people to separate their recycling out into 3 or 4 different containers. And option 8 is what we call a 3-stream recycling collection. So paper and card in one box, glass in one box, and plastic and cans in another box. Okay, so they're the options. Okay, with me so far? Shout up if I lose you somewhere. So this is the scoring table, and it's taken on a number of different factors, as I said earlier. So carbon production, and that's from collection to what we do with the material. It's the whole carbon footprint of that material, what we do and how we treat it and how we collect it. Recycling performance, cost, residual waste arisings, education and awareness raising, alignment with national policies, public acceptability, social value. So social value is, does this collection arrangement generate more jobs, basically? So it might be high cost, but it has some social value because we employ more people. Operational flexibility. Can you deploy your resources flexibly with this one? And resource use is, does this make the most of the resources that we collect? Okay, so got the baseline there. Option 1 and 2 about the education and about the reuse. The consultants found that the impact on the recycling performance was negligible. So it hasn't been scored. So we do say education and enforcement is important and it's an ongoing thing, but the actual impact that it has on your performance is insignificant. Okay, I just need to load my screen a bit and move your faces to the bottom so I can see what's here. So it's not playing ball at the moment. There we go. So the top scorers for us here are option 5A and 5B. So the top option here, the most beneficial option, is option 3. So free garden waste, separate food waste collections, giving everyone a smaller bin for their residual waste. And that scored the highest. So that scored 153.8 out of all those different collection options. So what the consultants are saying is that is your top scorer. It's not necessarily the one that we have to implement, but that is saying that it's the one that best meets all of those objectives that we're trying to achieve. Okay. I'm going to pause there. I've got 12 minutes left. There might be some time for questions.
Thank you, Matt. I'm just having a look to see if anyone has their hand up. They don't. I think we all understand the options and your table. I was going to ask about option 3, where the EPR and the DRS are included. So that's the deposit return scheme and the, extended producer responsibility. Why are those two not included in any of the other options?
I think they are, Chair. I think option 4, option 5A and 5B, and 6, 7, and 8 are all option 3, but with variables added.
So they're all option 3 plus. So all the basic elements of option 3 are carried over to those.
Yes, they are.
Okay. Yeah. So on option 3, cost has scored worst performing. Why is it that on option 3 it scored worst performing for cost, but not on any of the other options that are based on option 3 with additional elements?
Okay, so we're looking at sort of collective costs here. So if you look at cost, we can come on to cost in a minute. I think that option 3 assumes that we've got to do free garden waste, and it assumes that the government isn't going to subsidise our lost income. So it'll pay for the extra collections that we have to do. We currently collect from half the households in the borough, but the assumption there is that the government aren't going to subsidise our income that we collect on that one. So you'll see that option 4 next to it with the retained charge garden waste, the cost scores a 4. So we're still retaining that income from the garden waste collection.
So option 3, we've lost the garden waste income. We've had no compensation for that, but we have had financial support for introducing the food waste collection.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And so the other best performing options are option 5A and 5B, the difference between the two being reducing the bin size or increasing the time between collections.
Yes, so we're doing food waste. We're collecting food waste every week from people's house. We're collecting their recycling every fortnight. Option 5A is residual every fortnight, but with a much smaller bin. And 5B is with the same bin that you've got now, but collecting it every 3 weeks instead of every 2. So when we talked about the pledges earlier about restricting residual capacity, this is where that comes into play. If we didn't do that and we just provided everyone with a food waste caddy and said, please separate your food and put it in this caddy, and didn't change our residual waste collection arrangements, the participation rate in your food waste service would be quite low. You get some passionate people that would do it because they like doing the right thing for the environment, but people won't change from what they do now. They just have 2 extra containers in their kitchen and they wouldn't use them. You have to structure your system to encourage people to participate in the scheme, and that's what reducing the residual waste collection does, restricting the capacity.
So really, if we're looking at sort of the difference between option 5A and 5B, there's not much point introducing the free food waste collections if you're not going to reduce the size of the residual waste bin.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Why is it between option 5A and 5B on operational flexibility that 5B scores so much lower than option 5A?
Because if you keep your collections fortnightly, I think you can deploy your resources between rounds differently. So you can use your vehicles and your workforce differently, and say if you're short on one collection, you can deploy your people differently. I'm not sure 100% of the details behind it, but if you're collecting those the residual waste 3 weekly, it limits the amount of flexibility that you have with your vehicles and your workforce.
Okay. And I know you probably can't give us any official figures on this, but I know that you said earlier that you've had over 3,000 responses to the consultation from members of the public so far. Has there been a sort of overwhelming preference for one of these options? Has that come out?
No. I haven't done a detailed analysis, and that will be done in time. And I have read some of the responses, and you've got a wide range of opinions from I want my 240 litre bin and I want it collected every fortnight as it is now, and I'll never do food waste, whether you provide me with the containers or not, to yes, I'm quite happy to have a smaller bin. I don't need it. And if you gave me a food caddy, I would happy to participate in that, and every opinion in between. So there's quite a wide range of opinions there.
Okay, well, it'd be interesting to see when the results are collated, if there does come out to be one sort of option that's...
Yeah, I've got 5 minutes, Chair, and a few more slides if I can move on.
Okay, let me just see if anyone else has any questions. No hands up, carry on, Matt.
So this chart, I need to move your faces again so I can see the chart. So what we have here is each option costed, the projected recycling performance, and the cost increase relative to the baseline, and the cost per 1% increase in performance. So The baseline is £18.5 million across the partnership. That's the collection costs only, not the disposal costs. That's just the cost of collecting waste there. And the average performance is 46.4%. And you can see that each option is then costed there, and all of the options are significantly more than what we pay at the moment. Option 5A and 5B. Option 5B, collecting 3 weekly, costs less, but it's considered to be less publicly acceptable and less politically acceptable. Option 5A is more, about £1 million a year more, but their performance in terms of recycling rates, you've got 61.3 and 61.9 there. What you will notice is that none of these options actually get us to 65%, is where we need to get to by 2035. So we'd have to do a little more than what we've indicated on these main options that are modelled, but they do improve us from, say, a baseline of 46 to 61, nearly 62%. So that's a huge leap. It's a giant leap in performance, really, from where we are at the moment. I'm just going to see what other slide. If I can just, I think that's fine. I think that's my last slide, Chair.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions on this one? I was just looking at the difference in costs and recycling rate between 3 and 5A. In terms of costs, there's some difference, but in terms of the percentage of recycling rate, I think there's 3 or 4% difference there. And when we're looking at these figures, every percent counts, doesn't it?
It does, and I think what that shows, Chair, is how restricting that residual waste capacity, however you choose to do it, how that forces the behaviour change in people to make them use the recycling and the food waste systems that we put in place. It's all about that behaviour change, and they say that necessity is the mother of invention. Really, people will need and want to get rid of their food waste every week if their collection is 3 weekly. So they'll participate, or they won't have enough space in a smaller bin for all the food waste that they produce. So they'll have to use the scheme as it's designed.
Are the joint authorities collectively leaning towards one of these options? Is there a consensus between the authorities?
Well, it's for each authority to choose which one it wants to choose, or whether it wants to stay as it is. I think we won't be able to stay as we are, because there's going to be national legislation that comes in to dictate what we do. But it may be that one authority does one thing and another authority does another. We haven't collectively got to agree to do things the same, and there's a political element to this as well. What members might prefer in one area will be different to another. This is designed as a decision making tool, really, to influence and discuss and decide longer term what our authority might want to do.
Okay. I'm interested to see if amongst the members of the panel there's any consensus on which the preferred option might be, just from looking at the summary and having read part of the strategy. Does anybody have one of the options that they feel stands out as the preferable of the 8? Personally, I think it's between option 3 and option 5A. I can't imagine residents are going to be massively on board with 3 weekly collections. Councillor Baldwin?
I mean, I don't have an outright preference now. I'm just staggered by the increase in costs and how we're going to afford it. It's going to be a difficult push.
Well, without government financial support, I think we're going to struggle to afford it at all, as is every other local authority. So it does, they all kind of rely on some kind of financial support to introduce new waste collection streams.
We shall see.
Councillor Needham.
Yeah, so just to come in and say I'm kind of again in agreement with you that it looks like 3 or 5A seems to be the best, and it's quite interesting sort of thinking about how you were saying that 5A, although it's you know, it scores very low on public acceptability, it is the case of if you have, I think before the idea of having a reduced waste bin, people probably you know, want to push back on that, but then once they realise there are alternatives to put their waste, it's not the case that they're losing the capacity to dispose of waste, it's that they've got to dispose of it in a different way, and it often takes people a little while to get used to that. But yeah, so yeah, I'd kind of be falling again, like Councillor Baldwin said, probably haven't quite made up my mind just yet what I'd prefer, but 3 or 5A look to be that way. And I just wanted to say thank you for giving us this table map, because it's a really great way of presenting that information in a really accessible way that lets you look at the pros and cons, you know, rather than going backwards and forwards in that massive other document that's online, trying to compare the 8. I was going to say compare the 2, but compare the 8. But yeah, that's really, really useful way of presenting the information. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Laurie, and kudos to the 3,000 odd residents who've actually trawled through it and submitted responses so far. Councillor Forrest has her hand up.
Can you hear me? Thank you. Well, yes, I'd like to endorse Councillor Needham's. Thank you for this. It's a terrific piece of work from Matt, and it's really, yeah, it sets it all out very clearly. And I wonder if it would be possible if Matt could circulate to the panel this aspect of his presentation, so at least I can go through it at leisure and have time to take it in. My immediate response I would go for option 5A. It's more expensive, but I think it gives us more for our money. But I wouldn't like to make a final decision on that until I've had a chance to look at it. And I'm going to do something that I hate other people doing now. I'm going to talk about my ward, a third of which is students. Now, they can't cope with the size of bins that they already have. I'm sorry, but this is true. And if you're living like I do in a village in a house with bins, you get used to the system. But not every area of Loughborough will fit into this pattern. And I think that for it to work, there would have to be in some areas, would almost have to be a continuous education program to say, no, that goes in your green bin, not in your black bin. No, you can't put all of that in your green bin. Some of it must go in. I don't think that this is a one-size-fits-all program. And I would be interested to hear what Matt says about that.
You know what, Sandy, that's a really good point. And I think that kind of, Matt, I'll get Matt to answer that in a second, but I think that kind of leads us quite nicely into what's the work is for the next meeting, because we're supposed to be looking at barriers to different cohorts in the community to recycling. And I think you're right. I think the student population is one of those groups that we should be engaging with. Matt, could you respond to Sandy's points?
Absolutely right. I think this is the sort of collection systems that we talk about. This is what we do for 95% of households. There's 5% that doesn't really fit neatly into this collection arrangement. So flats and apartments, how do you collect food waste from flats and apartments? Very, very difficult. Communal bin stores, things like that. That's a challenge, you know, and how do you provide that capacity to those properties? How do you restrict the residual waste to people that have shared bin stores and things like that? That's a challenge, as is the student areas. You know, sometimes you've got 5 or 6 students living in one house, so you have to tweak your system to meet the requirements of those particular residents. But the question that I really like asking people is, if you have a weekly food waste collection, if all the packaging that you get is recyclable and we can collect it from our recycling service, if we do textiles, batteries, small electrical items as part of our collection arrangements, we're doing garden waste, what is going in the black bin? What do people do it? I mean, I can think of two. I can think of two things. I can think of animal waste. I think is the polite way to describe it. Animal waste and nappies. Okay. I can't think of anything else that's going to go in that black bin. If you use all of those other collections to the best of your ability, can't think of anything else. And then talk about student households as well. They're not likely to have animals.
No.
And not many of them will have children. Some of them might have, but not many. So, you know, we've talked about some councils having separate nappy collections as well and collecting those separately and dealing with that differently. If we do all these things, what you know, people will complain that their bin is smaller or we collect it less frequently, but what are they using it for? That's the question. And I don't know the answer.
Yeah, it's a good question. Okay, I don't have any other hands apart from Councillor Forrest, and I assume you don't have another.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Well, I think I would suggest that Laura sort of goes away and prepares the minutes, and we look at preparing a draft submission to the consultation. And maybe at that point we can talk about whether the panel members want to sort of say that they're more in favour of one specific option than others. If we don't feel comfortable doing that, then I don't think we have to do that. But I think we have some comments that we can make on the individual pledges. So if everyone's happy with that, thank you very much for these presentations, Matt. It's obvious that there's an awful lot of work gone into it, and I think it really has helped members of the panel understand what the various options are and what the strategy is aiming to do. So the last remaining item on our agenda then is item 9, which is further panel meetings and key task planning. So we have to consider the remaining.
Matt, could I just ask Matt to stop sharing his screen for me? Thank you, Matt. Thank you, just so I can get I can't see my paper. Thank you.
So we have to consider the remaining key tasks in our scoping document. Laura, do you have that to hand?
I do. That's just what I was. Right. Okay. So there are a couple of things that you possibly have done in part through various other things you've been doing, but that still haven't been completed. I've provisionally put them in for the next meeting, and they are the one you've just mentioned, Councillor Ward, which is identify barriers and look at ways to overcome them. So there's probably a little bit of work to do there. And you've already said that perhaps in doing that, you might want to undertake some engagement residents or with Serco. And the other one was researching waste prevention activities and organisations, some of which I think you have already done in doing other tasks actually. So they were the two things that were still down to be done for the next meeting.
Okay. I did talk about the engagement with stakeholders bit with Matt last week when we had a meeting, and I think we agreed that there is some work that needs to be done on that, and perhaps that's something that Laura and Matt and myself could look at outside this meeting. If anybody has any stakeholders that they think need adding to the list that we compiled for the scoping document, if they could maybe get in touch with Laura about that. I think perhaps speaking to the university about the student cohort and what barriers they might be facing in light of Councillor Forrest's points would be a good idea. I would say that I think we've covered the waste prevention element in other meetings. Would everybody agree with that? Yeah. So we're left with the stakeholder engagement about barriers and encouragement then. And I think the only other thing was the visit to CasePack, which Matt's already sort of part organised with CasePack. So I think that leaves just you, me and Matt with jobs to do between now and the next meeting.
I could as well, Chair, please, just to mention that additional meeting date, the 26th of April, we have moved that on a little bit. Council members will have received an alternative date of the 11th of May for that. Just it happened after we'd sent the agenda papers out, so the next meeting is actually the 11th of May. And the other thing to say is when you are sure of the stakeholders and the engagement you want to do, that is something that can be done outside of formal meetings if members of the panel feel that's more appropriate, as long as we at some point feed that into a formal meeting. So that's the other thing I just wanted to say on that, please.
Thank you, Laura. It's my mistake with the meeting dates. I should have noticed.
No, it's wrong on the agenda because we sent the agenda and then we changed the meeting, but I just didn't want people to wonder where the 26th of April is.
Yeah. I would suggest that perhaps the best way to do sort of the engagement is to have that happen before the next meeting, and then to bring sort of the results of that engagement to the meeting for panel members to look at and to make any recommendations based on the results of that. Is that acceptable to the other members of the panel?
Yep.
Because I think that would make for a very busy meeting if we were asking all of those people to engage with the panel. Okay, great. In that case, I think we've covered everything on the agenda. So thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for giving a little bit of extra time this evening.